I don't, like to do the formal intro kind of stuff, So, so you have your your studio, but you're saying it's a lot of other things. Is it so workspace? Is it your like Iron
Yeah,
Man
well,
cave where you do
it's
your
my
tinkering?
Iron Man cave. I think I know I always wanted my own, like, Dexter's laboratory thing.
Yeah.
And so this becomes that. It becomes, whether it's well, one day it's an armory, the next day it's an auto body shop, uh, or it's the meeting place for new ideas and good ideas, and so yeah, it just kind of always becomes something different. I had this master plan of everything going to be in a particular place, and eventually maybe it'll land there. We're coming on 2 years in this facility. The first year of moving in anywhere, it just sucks because, nothing's ironed out and you're still trying to figure out the place and whatever. So we're in year 2. Things are kind of finding homes, and, I'm hopeful that here soon everything will be where it belongs. We had a contractor come in when we first got the place, and they had this beautiful vision for the way everything, should be in this place. And, I couldn't pull the trigger because I couldn't settle down on the vision that they had of, like, well, this room's just going to be that forever. I don't know. I
Yeah.
think we need to figure out what that room needs to be first, and then we'll come back with our master plan.
Usually how it works. The first year's tough. When we moved 221B Tactical to Florida, the first 6 months was just trying to set things up, and then you set things up, and then you realize they have to be switched up to accommodate order fulfillment and a whole bunch of things. So I had the schematics drawn out pretty close prior to getting all the shelving brought in and all the gear brought in. But then as time went on, I kind of realized, okay, I got to move this over here. I should move this here. This is going to be more efficient. When you're building a warehouse and you're building things for order fulfillment, the less movement, the better. As things need to be as close as possible to the
Right.
people, ordering. Less movement, trying to do the Amazon thing on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and it was nice because in the beginning days, the warehouse was my house, my garage, so everything was in one space. It was a nightmare. It was all over. But it's
Yeah.
what you got to do to grind.
Wait, tell me more about those beginning days.
Man, let me tell you. I started in my garage in Jersey, and when I came up with the first product, the Max Dry Vest, I had to go 15 hours on a flight to South Korea to get the product made and the material made, and I brought it back, and I was tinkering in my garage, cutting, sewing. I didn't know how to sew, so I had to get a sewing machine. I got a sewing machine from a yard sale, and then I just was like, all right, let me figure out how to sew. And then I didn't know how to do edging. I didn't know how to sew binding on the edges. So I used duct tape because I didn't want to learn how to sew edge binding. So I just used duct tape around the neck and around the shoulder points, and everything else, straps and stuff I had to sew. Man, it was crazy. It was a wild time. And then when the product came in, I had it in my house and I was packing orders in my garage, and there was no heat in the garage. So in the winter, my fingers were freezing. I'm packing these orders, I'm printing these labels. The first few customers had handwritten labels on,
Yeah.
and I was like, all right, I can't keep doing this. And then I would put them all in a laundry basket and drive them over to the post office. Man, it was real ghetto. It was
That's
real
cool, man.
ghetto. Yeah, but
My perception of 221B Tactical is like, where it's at now. I
yeah,
wasn't a part of the grind, and as a founder, I'm not in the garage anymore, but I remember for the first 2 years, I felt like I was refactoring the garage like every 6 weeks. I'm like, okay, now this has to get moved here and it has to get moved here. And it's perfect. But it's perfect for like 90 to 120 days before it has to get refactored again. And,
yeah.
and that was really, when we got into this space, I was like, I think I've run out of all the options for material and storage solutions and organization in this garage. It just doesn't equal here anymore, and anyways, Jack White has a song called Little Rooms. It's all about how great ideas start in little rooms, and it's cool to hear your backstory about how it was in the garage. I identify with that. I was freezing in the garage as well. Of course, in Texas with no AC, that was one of the first big business expenses, was going to get a window unit that I could put in the garage so that I could stay in there and continue working in the middle of the summer. Um, So, anyways, I love hearing founding stories like that. It's inspiring.
Yeah, man, that's it. And I'm so glad I started that way. And we had no funding, we had no venture capital, I didn't even know about any of that stuff. It was just literally just grinding, but going to Office Depot, buying a printer, like I said, getting the sewing machine from the garage sale, and figuring it out. Figuring it out. Started a Shopify store, and just ran Facebook. Didn't even do Facebook ads. Did Facebook posts, because back then, 2014, you could post something on Facebook and it was selling a product and it would go viral. People around the world would see it. Now,
Right.
what, like less than 0.1% of your followers see it.
Sure.
So it was a different time then. But we've learned a lot. We've had to adapt. But it was good to start that way, because you learn a lot along the way, and you learn about processing. And to me, I'm grateful. I'm very grateful for it, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. There are some lessons I wish we would have learned as a company a little sooner, but I always say everything happens for a reason, right at the right time. So I learned those lessons at the exact moment, the universe wanted me to learn those
Yeah.
lessons. And, God put everything
Yeah.
in my path exactly when I needed them, and the hurdles, and also the ladders that got me over the hurdles. So it was
I,
all right at the right time.
in those beginning phases, I really needed other people to believe in my product idea in order to validate it. And that's the biggest shift that's changed now is I'm glad when people don't validate my product ideas. That means it's a little bit ahead of what everyone's ready for. It means it's new. It means that it's going to be disruptive. And at that time, product ideas and all these kinds of things that would come up, I really valued and really wanted the customer feedback to validate me and my idea as good. And that's the biggest, most significant change that's happened between then and now for me is I don't need anyone to believe my idea is good. I know it's good, and I'll wait for everyone to catch up, and get on board with something. Or if they don't understand it, it's because I haven't explained the product well enough. So maybe I need to get out there and expose this other element of it, But it's not anymore that I need other people's feedback for me in order to know the value that I'm providing by a product or a service. Definitely the single biggest change from what the early days were versus what they now are. Obviously, materially they're different, product wise they're different, space is different, so many business lessons and all those kinds of things. But that is what kind of runs the show now is not me being so much concerned about other people understanding it as much as I am concerned with spending the time helping make sure that I put the tools out there for other people to understand it. And that's why I'm here today with you on this show is, specifically to talk about A.T.O.C and all these things. This is something that's going to help people further understand the idea, what it can do, what it can't do, what its limitations are. And, really, this is the broad brush that we're going to paint for A.T.O.C today. It's a new software. It's something new that people haven't seen or heard of before. It's solving a new problem that everyone's had. The problem is old, but the solution is new. So anyways, I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to be on the podcast and to talk about those kinds of things today.
Yeah, and you're welcome. This is the perfect time, because 221B Tactical is going into a shift where we're shifting away from product oriented focus and shifting into just mission ready. So that's what we're calling it, mission ready. And it's mission ready for those who are first responders going to work every day, working on patrol, but also mission ready for those who are just, we call them responsible civilians, who want to be more prepared for their daily life, for whatever might come at them. Whether you're, a single guy living in a city or living rural, or you're a dad, a husband, whatever, it doesn't matter. You have to be prepared and ready. And we always say, it's better to stay ready than to try to get ready. And when something traumatic happens, or there's an event, when the event, right to the right of bang, is not when to figure out what to do and how to get ready and how to prepare. There's degrees of preparedness that should happen to the left of the bang, and some people are not ready at all. And then, of course, as you know, some people are extremely ready. I think most people want to be somewhere in the middle, where they're not sitting there, having underground bunkers built in their backyard. But
Not
yeah,
everybody wants that.
well, I do, but
I want
yeah,
it.
I want an underground bunker with the armory attached, and I want like 3 bedrooms underground.
Yeah. Wait, you're telling me not everybody wants a missile silo in Kansas? What's going on?
I don't know. I don't know. Some people just don't get it. But so we are focusing now on mission ready. That's our focus for 2026 moving forward. How can we get people better prepared? Because we realized there was a lot of people who had our gear and were buying our products, but they're not prepared. They're not prepared for anything. They're simply not ready. So we
Yeah.
want to change. And I don't want to say prior to this, we didn't care because we always cared. But now we're focusing on it. Now we're saying, okay, listen, we are putting our attention toward making sure you don't just buy our products, but you know what to do and you're ready. When it comes to something like GridBase, you're looking at helping people be more ready and equip them with knowledge so when an event occurs, they're not out in the wind.
Yeah.
And, so
For us, there's always been this thing of well, if people could communicate better or organize better, then they could be more effective. All the tools in the land and everything else, it's all important. The thing that we have always focused on is organization and communication from the very beginning of our products. Information, organization, communication. That's just kind of been the guiding force behind everything we've done. And just to your point, it is like let's get people ready. And I think there's so many people out there providing solutions. There's great firearms instructors out there, and there's great firearms manufacturers out there. And these things exist on these really firm pillars. These firm pillars that were, Noveski and Cry were built out of, GWAT, hardened companies that got boots on ground experience in the desert, and so there's these really firm pillars that exist in all these great companies that answer a really specific question. For a really specific group of people. But then there's these other areas like communications and organizations that have these really shaky pillars, mainly because the space is so rapidly evolving. Communications technology is changing year end over year end. And so it's difficult to keep up. I think cost prohibitive is something, but I think more than anything, it's because you can't tangibly see it. You can see a rifle and pretty much instantly understand the use case of it, or you can see a tourniquet and immediately understand the use case of it. A radio just kind of sitting there, it doesn't really inspire, ideas very much. It's not something that's immediately understood on site. An organization, that's one of those things that, like, you see the effect of it on the battlefield, but you don't see the months and months and months of area studies that happen beforehand and intel gathering. And, I say months, in some cases, decades of intel gathering of all kinds, signatures intelligence, human intelligence, open source intelligence, all the intelligence, give us all of it. You don't ever get to see that part. You just get to see the smooth, fast execution that's the result of a lot of planning. And so I think that's where we wanted to shine a light on some of those things, because they're a little more esoteric, they're a little harder to see. But same mission, same focus, equipping people, getting people ready. And A.T.O.C, GridBase as a whole has been a physical product provider. A.T.O.C is kind of a subsidiary of that for software. And so it's a bit newer and different than what we've done in the past, but still focused in the same, DNA of everything else that we've done prior with regard to organization, communication, and these kinds of things.
Yeah, and so I wanted to start there. And so you're saying that, and I want to let the people who are listening, watching, have a grounding, because this is going to be a pretty deep conversation when it comes to and I say this all the time, and I'm not. This is no, slight to women or anything, but our audience and our customer base is over 93% male. So when I say this, for those listening, it's just really just a figure of speech. So, but for me as a man, when I'm saying, okay, I want to be prepared to protect my family in the event something occurs, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's civil unrest, I don't know. I just, maybe the communications lines go down. Just a couple of weeks ago, Verizon Wireless was down in my state. I think it was a nationwide thing. And I have backup channels of communication. But most people I know don't, which will bring us to another topic, which was, what's the point of me having it if people I want to communicate with don't? So that's something I'm sure you could touch on. So, and that was a real eye opener for a lot of people. I talked to some of the men where I live. I talked to some of the men I know, and they said, "Hey, I was just lost. Guys couldn't get in touch with their children. Guys couldn't get in touch with their wives, and they just really felt lost. And they had no plan. They had no plan. They had no contingency in place. Nothing. So you just said that ATOC, and I want you to explain what the acronym stands for and what GridBase was, and you're saying it's a separate entity. So that's not part of the GridBase company, or you started a separate business or entity for ATOC. So I want to get into that, but if you don't mind, because I guess this all started with GridBase, and the first, let me say, product I was introduced to was Pocket. And so why don't you just go back and let's let the listeners and viewers know, how did GridBase start? What was the thinking behind starting it, the foundation? I think most of us know, really, be prepared, be ready for any of these events, any of these circumstances, any of these situations. So how did that start? Like, what was the catalyst to that? And then let's kind of talk about some of the things like Pocket and other things and so that was the foundation. And then I think that'll be a good segue to ATOC, and people will have an understanding how one led to the other.
Yeah, well, there's probably three different, origin stories. GridBase was kind of built over the course of a lifetime's worth of thinking, of ideas and ideologies. But at the end of the day, radical independence is what started GridBase. And there's this thing that I'm vehemently against, which is somebody else controlling or owning my access to stuff. My capabilities shouldn't be outsourced to somebody else, and it's not because of any other reason that I don't know. I identify with the frontiersmen. I identify with westward expansion. I identify with 1930s industrial revolution. I identify as an American with these truly American ideals that, like, there's this self empireship, and self capability. And so, of course, it comes out of a place of wanting to provide for my family and all these kinds of things. But at the time of the idea of Pocket, I didn't even have a family. I wasn't even married at that point. It was 2018. I was living in a van, and I had, for the first time, kind of tapped into this world of decentralized infrastructure, or that's to say, like ham radios and such. Because I was living in Colorado in my van, and oftentimes in areas with little to no cell service. And I came to know about this ham radio network in Colorado that really fascinated me. I learned that you could send text messages over ham radio. And, I had grown up watching Dukes of Hazzard and seeing CB radios. I had pretty much had a CB radio in every car I ever had, including a Volvo S60 at one point, or S90, that I had strapped a CB antenna to the mirror on, and so I had always had a CB radio. I thought they were cool, and when I could scratch out some mileage on them or hear something going on traffic wise, that was really cool. So just a lifelong fascination with radical independence and owning the ability to communicate. Not being wholly reliant on cell phones. And I was born at a nexus of time where I remember still a reality where there was no cell phone. And I remember a disconnected reality. So I was still very much in touch with that, and being raised by my grandparents a lot. It was like I was tapped into an even older generation than what mine was. And all of those things just organically led to an interest of not only, we reframe it all the time in this, like, capability and, ready for stuff and all of that. Mine came really, really honestly with just being fascinated with the radical independence that decentralization brought into your life. The ability to pick up a ham radio and to talk to somebody else and rely on no other man or service other than yourself for that to happen. Relying on physics alone to make that happen was something that was like the modern expression of westward expansion for me, in the day and age where you could just pick up the cell phone. But it's like, who's in between the cell phone and you. Somebody else could turn off your access to that. But I really wasn't, at the time that I came up with, at the time that I was getting interested in decentralized infrastructure, which is infrastructure that doesn't exist on somebody else's terms. That is to say, a phone call or a conversation you can have regardless of what somebody else does or decides to do. It's just up to you and the other person. Um, I was not wholly tapped into this idea that it was necessary for me to be prepared radically or anything like that. It was just a genuine interest in self-sustainment and inspired by classic Americana. You know, and
That is
and
not
so
the answer I thought. I thought it was going to come from some like deep dark place, but that's actually great. It's very refreshing because you were just saying, let me just get connected back to, let's say, the roots.
yeah,
How did the pioneers do it? And let me just figure out a way not to be tied to the system and have that independence, which is actually a pretty. A lot of people get into. I don't want to call it the prepper world, but let's, for the sake of this conversation, call it that.
sure,
Because, like you said, sometimes there's some radicalization behind it, but I think that there's a lot of people. There's more people who want to know about this stuff and need to know about this stuff, and it's not coming from anywhere radical. It's really just coming from a place of, "Listen, I don't want to be screwed if something happens, and I just want to. I want to have a plan to know how to communicate with other people, and like you said, not have, that reliance on a middleman like Verizon Wireless, AT&T, T-Mobile. They're the middle person, and if at any point, whether it's the government or they themselves say, we're not going to allow these people to communicate with each other, like you
yeah,
said, they could flip a switch and you're done. You're
sure.
out. So it is very empowering to have something in place that is independent of that, to let you know, like, okay, yeah, no, like, go ahead. If that does happen, go ahead. I'm not worried about that.
No, look, I refuse to be put in a box as some sort of crazy terrorist cell prepper because I have a gas mask. And I heard it recently. I don't watch the news, but it was on, and I heard somebody say something like, yeah, he had a, the guy had a gas mask and like all kinds of stuff, as if that means anything, I mean, you go to Baltic countries or whatever, it's like gas masks are surplus items that everyone has, in the Eastern bloc of Europe.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon. So as if a gas mask means something. But no, look, I refuse to be put into that kind of box. What I am is passionately American, inspired by Americana, westward expansion, rugged individualism, personal empireship. These are the things that our ancestors worked hard to build and to inspire us with. And what a shame to leave that on the table. Think about the amount of shoulders that we stand on, the amount of blood that's been shed for radical Americana, and yeah, that's all it is. I'm an American, unapologetically, America first, all day long, and I'm not going to sit here and be labeled by somebody as anything other than just a red-blooded American, and that's genuinely where this comes from. I was in the Rockies, I was in Denver, going through all around the Western Slope and on the Front Range and just exploring the mountains and just thinking like, wow, like people cut these roads, people cut these mountains, just genuinely inspired by the landscape that is here in America, and I lived on the West Coast in California for a long time, all up and down the West Coast, and same thing, I've been to Northern California where, there were gold mines and abandoned mines and things like that. I have seen this country and I've seen what people did with it, and I have seen how people have exploited and taken advantage of and benefited from, and, the essence that is Americanism. It doesn't matter if you were Irish slaves for 400 years, or if it just didn't matter where you came from. It didn't matter if you were German and you came up through the rivers to go to Milwaukee and start beer companies. It didn't matter what you were doing, but everybody was here setting their differences aside. Germans were working with Irish people, and Jews were working with Italians, and everybody was just working together to just create something that they had never seen before, because they wanted a different future than what they had. And so, yeah, my desire for creation or whatever is just rooted in that. And so specifically to answer your question with Pocket, there became, COVID happened. 2018, I'm in the van. COVID happens. And now all of a sudden, I'm kind of like, whoa, maybe this is a little deeper than just decentralization for fun westward expansion reasons or whatever, and maybe there's more value to this. And I had come across this idea of internet in a box, but it was kind of stuck in a hole in the internet, for lack of a better term, just really technical people. And it was kind of their little thing that they were keeping over there. And I couldn't really figure out where to buy one. It didn't exist to purchase one. And so I set off on making my own. Mind you, at this point, I have no computer, no laptop. AI was not prolific at this point. So it was kind of just, I was watching a bunch of Indian guys on YouTube trying to tell me, coding language from videos from 2006 or whatever, and scrapping together this thing. And by the time it was done, it was a little off-grid internet in the box. And my wife, you should make a TikTok about that. Well, I didn't have a TikTok at that time, or an Instagram, or any of that. And so I made a video about it, and it really inspired a lot of other people. And a lot of people were like, man, I wish I could buy that. And that was the same feeling that I had when I set off to make it, And so I thought, well, I bet there's a whole lot of people out there who would really appreciate this. And so at the time, there was a company, and they're still around, Kiwix. And Kiwix, the founder of Kiwix, Stefan, they live overseas in Europe. And I had reached out to him. I had built it. I reached out to him. And he never reached back out. I guess it got lost in his inbox and stuff. I said, whatever, we're just going to move forward and start selling it. And we did, and we sold a lot of them. And eventually, Stefan found out about us, reached out to us, and we've collaborated with Kiwix since then. And it was kind of this full circle moment for all of us. And thousands of Pockets sold now at this point. At that point was when I gained a passion for building tools for people, and building useful tools for people, because that was not, the intent by which it set out on. But I became really passionate about teaching, communication stuff, became really passionate about building tools for people. And I think I kind of exist in this world where, because I didn't come from that world, but I can understand it, I kind of have this ability to communicate with the layman about why these things are important, or how they work, or whatever the case may be. And that's one of those luck favors the prepared situations right there, where it was a perfect mix. But that's where Pocket began. That's where off-grid internet began. That's where GridBase began as a whole. That's where our social media and the relationships and the networking and all of the things that were built out of that. A huge community now has been established out of that Pocket, or out of that product, Pocket, and the other products that we've developed since then. And one of the struggles that I always had, and you probably understand this as a founder, you're always trying to hit the trifecta. You're trying to have enough marketing dollars to reach the people, but if you reach the people, do you have enough dollars left over to then build the product, get the material, and get the labor? And it's this thing where you're constantly trying to hit the trifecta of, I need enough money for labor, marketing, and material to really get something spooled up. And we hit that. We found it once or twice, but it was just very, very difficult. With the margins that we had to have, in order to even run a business or do new product development or anything, it was difficult to try to eke that out. And so we still sell Pocket, but I wanted a tool that could reach more people. And that was the thing. The demand for Pocket was higher than what I could keep up with. And so then I started thinking about, how can I get a valuable tool into people's hands at scale? And, that was where the software conversation started to come about with A.T.O.C, because there's lots of really cool products out there and lots of really cool product ideas that we have and would love to execute. Unfortunately, the thing about being a disruptor or a creative is that it doesn't inspire VC funding. And so it's this thing where we've had meeting after meeting. For those who are not familiar, it's venture capitalists or angel investment. It's companies that come in and inject money into your company so that you can do more. And that's how most companies get above this hump that I'm talking about. Either they have a really, really strong revenue model, but I would say probably 92% of the time that I see these companies that do really well, that had a good product at launch or whatever, they got some kind of injection funding. And the thing is usually they have a product that's really easy to understand. There's something known as TAM, which is total available market, and customer acquisition costs. These VC firms want to know about these kinds of things. And so when you're dealing with something like off-grid internet in a box or whatever, the total available market for a product like that is difficult to quantify. The customer acquisition cost is difficult to quantify. And so, despite our best efforts, despite really strong numbers, as I mentioned, thousands of pockets sold, in a very short amount of time, like we have strong revenue history. It just never gave anyone the warm fuzzy that they needed. And ultimately, I'm grateful for that. And I think those VCs made the right decision. If I had a bunch of money and I was looking at handing it out, I'd want to know those same things too. So this is not like a Jake got burned situation or anything. It's just the fact of the matter. We're dealing with disruptive products that have, not clear problems that they solve or whatever the case is. And all the revenue in the world doesn't inspire somebody to inject money and does to get us over that hump. And I'm grateful for that. I never had to put on a tie and meet some ridiculous quotas that somebody wanted me to make, and have to just start selling my soul to like move product. Otherwise, I'm going to owe them all this money. Like, I have heard of that happening, and companies have gone out of business, lost control like that. We never lost control like that. We never over leveraged ourselves. We just kind of battened down the hatches and just kept trudging along until we were able to solve the problem that we needed to solve, which was how do we scale? How do we grow? That is the question for any small business. It's how are we going to scale? And software was the answer, And so then it was, if we're looking at building a software product that's within the lines of what we already do, what does that software product look like? And what is the most difficult problem that people are trying to solve? And how could we be a part of solving it? Because that's really what we were trying to do in the beginning of Pocket. There was this question of like, what happens if the internet goes out? That was a really big question. And then, COVID kind of woke us up to that. And then we had AT&T outage after AT&T outage. And, we just saw so much stuff that kind of unfolded after that really gave credence to that line of questioning, even from a common man, which is like, what are we going to do if the internet goes out? And so we just wanted to continue to solve really difficult problems for people at scale. And so that's where A.T.O.C comes in, because with a software product, well, I'll tell a story real quick. There's a guy fishing on a pier, and he keeps catching these really big fish, and he keeps throwing them back, but he keeps catching these small ones, and he's throwing them in the bag. And the fishermen all along the pier are getting really, really frustrated with them. And finally, one guy comes over, and he's like, why are you throwing these beautiful, huge fish back? I don't get it. He's like, you're keeping all these small ones, you're tossing those big ones back all the time. And he goes, because I only have a 9-inch pan at home, so I can't keep those big fish, And it was like this thinking of, if we're going to scale, we need the biggest pan possible. We need to be able to get this tool and make as many capable and organized people as possible. And so how can we do that? And software is a way to do that. You can scale that really rapidly. And you can control user bases a lot better, and I think too, it's easier to understand for people. People have interacted with software and web-based tools before, so it's easily understood. So anyway, I'll turn it back to you. I think I'm kind of rambling at this point, but that is, how we transition from Pocket to A.T.O.C.
Give people an understanding, just a really brief overview of what Pocket is.
Yeah. So at a hardware level, Pocket is a small computer with a battery pack and a storage device. Okay, so from a hardware level, that's all it is inside of a waterproof case. At a software level, what it's doing is it's emitting a Wi-Fi signal that you can connect to locally. I think we have to split the term here of Wi-Fi, not Wi-Fi connected to the mainline internet. Wi-Fi is actually just a signal that you can connect with, just like there's Wi-Fi thermostats in your house. They're not They're not emitting Wi-Fi that you can watch Netflix over. They're using Wi-Fi as a protocol to connect. And so that's what happens. This little computer puts out a Wi-Fi hotspot that you can connect to. And then on that little storage device, there's a database that you can access. So that database has things like all of Wikipedia on it, how to fix it manuals, right? And so if you need to change a carburetor, I think one of the articles in there is changing a carburetor on a Honda Rancher, So yeah, if all kinds of stuff. Like I mentioned, the entirety of Wikipedia, hundreds of thousands of books, on and on and on I could go. Ultimately there's over 500 gigs of data that's on Pocket, and that's compressed data. So not raw data, but just compressed data at that amount. So if you look at just Wikipedia by itself, Wikipedia ends up being like 92 gigs compressed. So anyways, that's what Pocket is. That's how it works from a hardware and a software level. It's very simple. It's probably if people were trying to equate it to something they know, it's like the internet in the 90s when people would connect their Ethernet cables to other people's computers and they would file share. It's like that for the 21st century, where we're just doing the same thing. We're just file sharing, but we're doing it over Wi-Fi. And the benefit of that, as opposed to just saving it on your phone, is that when you save it on your phone, you're taking up storage on your phone. We all know how frustrating it is to always have to be clearing out storage stuff on our phone or not having enough to take a picture or whatever. So you're storing it locally on your phone. It's taking up space. But the other thing is that it's not collaborative. So we had this idea that we really wanted it to be collaborative, where one could be deployed and 10 people could be connected to it at the same time. The benefit of that being that what happened?
You actually froze for about 10, 15 seconds. I could hear your audio, but your video froze,
Uh-huh.
and then it just dropped out.
Weird.
Very weird.
I have fighter jets fly over every once in a while, and sometimes I wonder if they're using the same stuff that they were using in Venezuela.
Just the blocking stuff.
Yeah, because it's like right when that happened, there were a bunch of fighters that flew over, and I was like, "What are they doing?"
Is there an Air Force base near you?
There's a reserve base.
Yeah, no. Maybe they're testing some stuff out. You never know.
They've got some advanced fighters over there that they fly around here, and it's just interesting that that signal connection dropped out right whenever that was happening. But here's the deal: internet can drop out.
Yeah.
And so that's what Pocket does, right?
Yep.
We're experiencing it live right here. For those who don't know, my internet connection just dropped out, and in the middle of talking about how internet connection drops out, and we were talking about how Pocket performs the function of an offline internet.
Yeah. So you can access that. You can access Pocket from any of your devices because you said it's kind of like putting out its own Wi-Fi signal, and then
Right.
you access the information that's on it in an emergency when the grid goes down or something like that. Essentially.
Yeah, that or we go stay in cabins every once in a while down on the border in South Texas, and there's nothing to do there. So it's not there's no this probably now it'd be fine because I have Starlinks, but when we used to go there was no Starlink. And we would have we would just read books and play games, and that's all really fun, but I just go back to this thing of like it's not all about dying, and you could
Yeah.
also just take it into a cabin somewhere. I'll tell you, one of our customers actually worked in a diving bell, and he used it in a diving bell. He would spend months underwater as a welder, and he would play video games and stuff down there in that diving bell. And Pocket was great for him, And so those kinds of use cases as well, off-grid events, a more affordable Starlink or however you want to frame it. Starlink has its limitations too, with the fact that somebody else still controls your access to it.
Yeah.
You still got to pay your account and keep it up and whatever. And Pocket is none of that. You own that data. You access that data wherever and whenever you want to.
No subscription, no nothing needed.
No subscription, no nothing. One time buy.
Oh, that's incredible. So now let's talk about the transition to A.T.O.C, which is, let's say, web-based. And I guess let's talk about the first thing. What is it? And then for those who have it, how would they access it if there is a grid down situation?
Sure. Yeah, well, what you're alluding to is the fact that A.T.O.C is not decentralized, right? It is a web-based, server-based platform. And so I think that's kind of what the user would need to understand is that what we've built before is self-hostable. What we're building now is not self-hostable. However, that does not change the DNA of what we do, and I'll explain that question clearly. But what is it? It is A.T.O.C. So not to be too much of a smartass, but it is a tactical operations command. And so for those who don't know, a tactical operations command is kind of the nexus of an operation, whether that be a search and rescue, whether that be a crisis for a hostage, whether that be a mass casualty event from a hurricane or a tornado or a fire, or whether that be a tactical operation for, clearing rooms or whatever the case is. Usually there is a tactical operations command, and it serves to be the nexus of critical operations. It is the place that information flows to and flows out of appropriately, and it's just a normal part of leadership structure. So, any major company has a CEO, a CTO, a COO, these kinds of things. The TOC is a form of leadership structure, collaborative leadership structure in scenarios where people need to do advanced planning. And so what it does at the civilian level is it allows teams to organize, right? So maybe we're not responding to a school shooter today, but we are organizing our families for an ice storm that's going to happen, or we are organizing a training event, or we are going to milsim and airsoft to round out our skills, and we are actually, mock simulating missions for something like that. I think more and more every day, people are expected to do the jobs of large organizations and governments. And what I mean by that is the community response that we've seen to events like Western North Carolina hurricanes or California fires that we had a couple years ago. More and more we see a citizen first response because aid is prolonged. It takes a long time for aid to reach places. And so, where my heart is at in trying to organize teams, it's for those people. Down here in the south of Texas, or Central Texas, I guess, South Central Texas, we had some, once in 100-year floods that killed a bunch of people, and it was terribly tragic. And you had a community response first, for a sustained amount of time before we ever saw any government response or, a meaningful local response. Katrina, same thing. There was just a lack of organization from the different agencies that were involved. So yeah, this isn't really some pie in the sky problem. This is a real problem that real agencies have, that communities have, where natural disasters or cataclysmic type events happen, and a lack of organization leads to a higher death toll. In the case of Katrina, more people were tapping the same house because they couldn't communicate with the fact that they had already gone through and searched that house. So you had groups of people that were going and searching, say, 10 houses, but because they couldn't communicate with one another, Group A and Group B searched the same house instead of splitting those efforts between Group A searching this house and Group B searching that house and maximizing the limited resources. And daylight is another thing. In an event like that, daylight is almost the only time you have to do anything before you get generators and lights and all that kind of stuff up. So for the immediate response, the first 72 hours, you can only operate in daylight for so much of the time. So there's a time constraint there. Anyways, long short of it is the death toll in Hurricane Katrina is largely contributed to the fact that the resources that were available could not organize. And in fact, it was such the case that they moved over to a standardized P25 radio system as a response to Katrina and these other types of events. So Katrina and things like 9/11 have played a big part in new standards that have come out for communication and organization. So yeah, this isn't just Jake's word. This is real response to real events, and so that's what A.T.O.C aims to do. It aims to be an organization software, a field deployable talk. Traditionally this software is in the thousands of dollars, right? To government level $30,000 programs or whatever. Now the thing is that those government level programs are often serving thousands and thousands of managed teams and cross-functional. Maybe they're managing like HIPAA information and things like that, right? So they have a little bit of a different requirement. And so as a result, they're a lot more expensive. We're kind of looking at tailoring this to the citizen, to the group, and providing them with a tool that is much more affordable, to the tune of free, if you only need a little bit of the functionality that A.T.O.C offers. So,
So let me ask this,
yeah.
that just because I want the listeners to understand. If I'm a suburban dad, and I say, yeah, I want to be more prepared. This A.T.O.C sounds interesting. How would I, let's say I'm a dad, I got a wife, I got 2 kids and a dog, and just want to be prepared. I got some food in the basement, I got some extra water, I got some spare gas from my truck. Why is this something I'd want to take a look at? What would it do for me in that event?
I'm glad that you asked that because I think it serves that guy the most. That guy, everything falls on that guy's shoulders. He's responsible for planning everything. He knows the routes to where all the stuff is at. He knows how to do X, Y, and Z. It's all on him. He has no ability to delegate those burdens at all, making him the weakest link in the entire thing, because if he's gone, nobody else can perform any of these critical path functions. That is what A.T.O.C is for. If you could put on a map, here's where all of our stash houses are for water and food. Here's where the nearest ambulatory services are. Here's where all of the medical caches are. Here's where the gun stores and grocery stores and food banks are. If you can kind of get all that stuff out of your head onto something that somebody else can use, now it becomes a lot easier to delegate those tasks. Now, if you're down, we never like to think about that, right? We want to think, I'm strong, I'm going to be there, nothing's going to happen to me. But the reality is that it doesn't always shake out that way, and even something as minor as a sprained ankle can down you for a good amount of time. And so now you're having to, in the midst of a crisis situation, trying to remember and recall this critical information that you can pass off to other people. A.T.O.C is meant to help that guy with his workload so that he can delegate and so that ultimately his team can be more effective. When he's there, it will still be, a well-oiled machine. But it's going to be an even more well-oiled machine because that guy can now take what's siloed in his brain and share it with other people. In the corporate structure, it's called a silo. It's where you have people that know all of the things for their department, and it's a real culture thing for a lot of companies these days to try and what they call break down these silos, where they get that information out of that individual and share it with the team so that everybody can be cross-functionally, can add value cross-functionally instead of just everything hinging upon this one guy. And the reason that is the case is because a lot of companies are feeling the strain from having these one guys retire. A lot of people are retiring right now. Boomers are in the retirement phase. And so companies are seeing these people that were these knowledge wells fall off, and they have a big gap in their company structure. And so they're all about breaking down silos now, and, have been for a few years. A.T.O.C is just that. Let's break down the silo. Let's get the information all out of you. It doesn't all rely on you. You don't have to do it all by yourself. You don't have to carry the entire weight. You can let somebody else carry some of it, but not if you don't have a good way to organize that and explain what the critical path things are. And so A.T.O.C just allows you to do that. So that would be my response. B, I would just say that we don't outsource our safety. We carry our own firearm. We're not going to wait for the police to show up to defend us. We will just defend ourselves. And so similarly to that method of thinking, we don't need to completely outsource our planning to the emergency operations command of the local county. They're going to have different things that they're planning for that don't matter to you, and you're going to have different things that you know about that they're not even planning for. So the same way that you would regain your autonomy by carrying your own self-defense weapons, whether that's a firearm or whether that's a bear mace or a knife or whatever, we should also think of this idea of taking back our autonomy with planning. The same way that we're not going to wait for the firemen to come and put out the fire in our house. We'll just have a fire extinguisher in our house. Right. I'm not going to wait for the emergency operations command to declare an emergency before I'm prepared for one. So I think that kind of a twofold answer to try and address that question.
Okay, so going back to my scenario, the information is on there, so it's offloaded. So I don't need to, let's say, memorize it. I upload it to A.T.O.C, and it's there. And you're saying that, is this open, or is it other people I choose, I can give access to it as well, so they know the locations, they know the routes I'm going to take. So I would say, let's say let's just say hypothetically, I had a sister and brother-in-law, I had a couple of neighbors, and I had niece and nephew. I would say I would just give them access to A.T.O.C, I'm guessing through some kind of password, and they would have all the data that I've compiled for where fuel is, where food is, travel routes, hideaways, things like that. They would have access to it, and they would know all that. And that's strictly for me and my group of people. That's not open to anyone else, correct?
No, yeah. So the back end of our platform, when you're hosting stuff on databases, you look for something known as a Postgres, which is just a database where you can store information like this. If you're not storing it locally, like we talked about earlier with Pocket, we're storing it locally. Mm-hmm. So for us, we are holding it on a Postgres cloud database that has a SOC 2 certifications. So essentially what that means is that they have gone through a very expensive audit, and they're actually under audit all the time. So the current audit for our database expires on the February of 28th of this year. At that point, they will have to re-up their certification, or it will expire. Of course, if their certification expires, they lose a lot of customers, because a lot of customers are using them because they have that secure certification. But at one point, it was kind of a nice thing to have, but these days, it's just a requirement. People are aware of the fact that security matters. We've had a lot of security and data breaches and these kinds of things, and so the standard now for data security is really high. And so lots of Postgres, services that are out there, AWS cloud storage based databases that are out there, have this certification these days. And so, ours is no different. We have that. But to answer your question about how you share that information, you can do it numerous ways. Okay, so you can just export it in a PDF. Okay, so we allow you to put the information in there, and then it organizes all of it for you and puts it out on a nice piece of paper. Okay, and then you can do that numerous times for every single piece of data that you put inside of A.T.O.C. So of the types of data that you can put in A.T.O.C, there are things like PACE plans, which is primary, alternate, contingent, and emergency. So you can have a PACE plan for communication, right? I want to just call my cell phone. That's the primary. Okay, you know what? Actually, hit me up on the Garmin. That's the alternate. Okay, the contingent, we're going to use ham radios. Okay, and the emergency is smoke signals or whatever. But having all of those things outlined, right, in your ham radio communication, you could put your frequencies in there. You could put where the radios are located, but you could have that PACE plan ready to export and ready to print for whoever may need it at any given point in time. And so that's an example of one way to share the information that's on A.T.O.C. Another way is that you could just invite someone to become a part of your organization. Now, when somebody becomes a part of your organization and joins your account, they are assigned 2 pieces of what I would call granular access controls, which one is they are an admin, a contributor, or a viewer. Okay, and then they have a clearance level of 1, 2, 3, and 4. The clearance level controls what they can see. The account status changes how they interact with what they can see. So let's say that you don't want somebody to see this thing. You would gate it with that clearance control, but you could say every other user who has contributor status and the clearance level to see this thing can go ahead and interact with it and make edits. Maybe you won't want anybody to edit anything. You just want to bring them in as a viewer so that they can see stuff. You said your niece and nephew. They probably don't need to be editing anything inside of A.T.O.C at this point, but they do need to be able to view PACE plans. Now, they don't need to be able to view the assets. They don't need to know where all your safe houses and everything are, but they do need to be able to look at the PACE plans and, maybe some of the links that are within Vault. So
how would they access it if let's just say we had a grid down situation, and A.T.O.C is there. I've populated it with this information, but the grid is down. There's no cell service. No one has Wi-Fi in their home, and I've communicated to these people. Let's say my circle, hey, if we ever have the grid go down, and the internet goes out, and you don't have cell service, you don't have Wi-Fi, I want you to get onto this A.T.O.C, and you'll see all the information there that I've put there, and you'll know where to go, how to get there, whatever. How would they access it if their grid is down? They have no internet, they have no cell phone, they have no nothing. How would they access that?
Yeah, well, we live in a really good time for grid down scenarios, because even in places like Western North Carolina, everything was knocked out, Starlinks were still up and kicking, and people still did have Wi-Fi. But going with your scenario here, where there is no Wi-Fi, there is no access, this is why it's so important that we allow all of the data to be exportable. So in this kind of event, you would have set this up beforehand, and you would have had these things exported and ready to go. And in that particular case, A.T.O.C will not be functioning as a access, but it would have been functioning as an organization tool to help you develop these tools to keep offline.
Okay, got it. Okay,
So you would
so
have printed and exported these things. And I say these things, we talk about PDFs, but there's also things that are KML and KMZ files. For
mhm.
people that don't know what that is, it's a geospatial data file that you can use on offline mapping programs. So you could have an offline version of OpenStreetMaps, downloaded to a computer, or you could have A.T.O.C, which is the Android Tactical Awareness Kit, running on a Samsung phone that has map tiles downloaded to it. And all of the geospatial elements that you put inside of A.T.O.C, such as asset locations, rally points, these kinds of things that are geospatially important,
Yeah.
you can export those as KMZs or KMLs and then upload them into your A.T.O.C Samsung phone or your computer that has OpenStreetMaps, and you can see that geospatial data set. So, I use PDFs because it's a really tangible way that people understand about interacting with information, but A.T.O.C actually does export data beyond just PDFs that allow you to interact with your data in a really interesting way, even in a grid down scenario.
Now, how do you address the concern by some people who would maybe say, be like, I have some friends. They would say, well, if that's online, I don't want potentially the government or maybe some people who don't have good intentions finding out my plan, my escape plan, my hideouts, my fuel caches, my food caches. I don't want you know the feds finding that. So first, I don't think I don't think many people are worried about that, but I think there is, as you know, there's a certain element of people in this country that would be very worried about that. So what? How do you let me say quell their concerns?
Yeah, look, I get it, right? We are pioneers of this exact idea of what you're talking about. Years ago when we started, we brought this idea to the table that hey, decentralization is really important. Cybersecurity is really important, So we're not strangers to that idea. We're proctors of it, A.T.O.C exists as a tool. A frictionless tool that allows a lot of people to use its service. Now, is it completely impervious to any cyber attack ever? Absolutely not. The NSA can remotely access anything that they want to. The government already has an API on you. Which, if you don't know what an API is, it's like a linked data file that has all of your stuff in it. So, to the person that's saying that, I would want to make sure that it's in earnest, right? Like, do you own a Faraday bag? Is your phone in it all the time, except for whenever you need to make a phone call or send a message? And are you only using secure messaging services? And are you also under the understanding that those secure messaging services have limitations when it comes to the United States government? I would want to make sure that that question is being asked in earnest first. Because I think if somebody knows about A.T.O.C, that's probably not the case. The people who are actually practicing what they preach as it pertains to that are people who are off grid in the woods and have never heard of me or A.T.O.C or don't listen to podcasts or do any of that. Those are the people who are actually safe from the government. But if you're carrying your phone on you or you're interacting with technology in some kind of, if you're driving a car down the street and there's flock cameras tagging you all up and down it, or if you're buying stuff on Amazon, or if you've been to a gun store and got a suppressor, or if you've made a phone call with a friend and had illustrious conversations on the phone, guess what? It's all tracked, tagged, and bagged. So let's just make sure that everybody understands the playing field that we're on here. The surveillance grid is in place. The data centers are here to stay. Palantir and all of this stuff is here to build a surveillance grid, a really nice prison inside of the United States. Make no mistake about it. Okay, what A.T.O.C is for is not for you to mount some sort of John Wick, you're going to go and get all the pedophiles in the government, mission, right? That's not what A.T.O.C is for. And even if that is what you were going to use it for, the government would sweep you up on something else or use you as an asset for something else, for a political agenda or whatever, long before A.T.O.C ever played a part in that. Now, that's not to say that people shouldn't practice good security. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying understand where the limitations are with that security. The reality is that most of our people that we're defending ourselves against are radical people with political agendas such as Antifa. I'm not saying that that's the belief I hold, that they are or aren't. I'm just saying that they are radical folks who have a radical agenda, who are destabilizing neighborhoods, okay? And so they're an example of something that we want to protect and defend against. We have cartels on the other side of the border. There's something that we want to protect and defend against. Those are people that don't have the almighty power of the NSA at their fingertips, right? Those are people that are going to have a really difficult time getting past the TLS, the encryption, the encrypted at rest databases that have SOC Type 2 certifications, the multi-factor authentication that you can enable within your account. All these kinds of things are going to make it really difficult for somebody over there to access your account. One of the ways that most people get access to accounts is through data brokers, through data breaches. So, these things happen where a lot of passwords are leaked online, and then folks, don't change their passwords or use the same passwords for other things. And then, that's how people are able to get access to your bank accounts or whatever, hackers. The thing is that two-factor authentication has almost done away with that, because now if somebody does try and access your accounts, whatever they may be, you get a text message that notifies you, and you can quickly go change your password or not approve it on your phone, whatever the case is. And so two-factor authentication is something that I encourage, whether it's A.T.O.C or not. You should have it turned on every single thing, because a lot of times it is one of the last lines of defense when it comes to online security, especially as it pertains to data brokers buying leaked password data. So we've done what we can do, right? We've made it as safe as we possibly can within the confines of a cloud-based system, right? Now, I also want to say too, we're not done. Our pillars are centrally located at the cross section of decentralization, autonomy, and collaboration. These are things that we have pioneered and championed from the very beginning of our products, and we haven't abandoned them just because we've built A.T.O.C. We fully intend to make a self-hostable A.T.O.C version that will come out in the future. Whether people or not buy that in mass or not, I really don't care. It's something that we're going to do no matter what. We brought A.T.O.C online the way that we did so that the majority of people who are common sense can have a frictionless experience to see if the tool works for them and if we can prove viability. Because guess what? We tried it the other way. We tried it the other way, where we built all kinds of really obscure offline tools, and we saw 30 users. We saw 40 users because it was too prohibitive. There was too much friction, And so what it tells me as a someone who's looking at making products for people, it tells me that the ideology for most people is second to the experience that they're having. And so I will hold the ideology, I will keep it sacred, and we will make sure that we are doing things responsibly as we roll out these new products and things. And in the future, we will do more ideology-first products. But, for now, with the way that A.T.O.C is, our focus is on a frictionless tool that most people can use for events like natural disasters and protecting their community, and we hope that common sense people will use the tool for what it's for. And so far, we have over 3,300 users in our first month of launch, with no open bugs. As of sitting down for this meeting, we had 127 bugs on launch with that many users back in January. We solved them on an average of 2 per hour. So for every hour that was spent, we spent a half hour on a bug and we got it fixed. A lot of those bugs are due to feature requests. So when we got new users that came on board, they were requesting features. Well, we had already launched it in a bugless state, but when people started asking about features, well, now we're going to launch some new features and find some new bugs. So, this is an evolving thing, is my point, right? The community is very active. We have a Discord. We have the ability for people to contribute about the experience that they're having. We're not hiding anything with regarding the experience that folks are having, and the reviews are resoundingly good. 3,300 users. So I think that's 10 a day on average.
Yeah.
No, I think it's more than that. Math is bad. 100 a day.
That's pretty. I think from a start off standpoint, that's pretty good. So now, let's talk about cost, because I'm sure people want to know. Okay, well, how much does this cost? And is it a monthly thing? Is it like Pocket, a one-time thing? Or because it's kind of always all existing out there, is there a monthly maintenance you have to pay? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's come as you go. right? Like whatever you want to do on A.T.O.C is up to you. We have a free tier that'll be free forever that includes 3 different team members, 2 different assets, very basic organizational capability. That will always be free. We will never take that away from folks. We assume that most people will land there on a free account, and the numbers show that that really is the case, and that's enough for most people. We don't ever intend to change that about it. Now, for the person who has 20 team members, a lot of assets, they're very active, they're doing a lot of training events, whatever the case may be, we have options for those folks too, and we scale up to that. So our most expensive plan is what, $399 a year. And then our least expensive plan is $49.99 a year. And then we also have monthly versions of that as well. Of course, when you buy annually, you save a small percentage. I think most people do that. It's very common. But yeah, at the top out for all of the features, you're looking at $399 a year, and that's for 20 people. So we're talking about a tool that's serving 20 people. So you're dividing that cost amongst that group, right? So we're not looking at one guy having to bear the burden, and then for another person to be a part of his group, he's having to bear the same burden. We're really not looking at that. It's a collaborative tool that allows users to spread that cost, equally as they see fit amongst their team. And that way each member is paying $13 a year or whatever it comes out at, depending on what you're using. Some of the features you might be asking is like, well, what separates a free account from, a premium account? Well, one good example, there's obvious things like, the number of users you have, right? So I think that's obvious. The number of assets you have, those kinds of things. But some of the ones that might be less obvious is our AI mission planning tool. So, at this point, most people are familiar with AI, but they're familiar with the AI that is given to them. So, I think most people have used ChatGPT. It's very helpful. It's always trying to answer your questions and give you follow-ups. ChatGPT behaves that way because its system prompt is as an assistant. So it's always trying to follow up with, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? The AI that exists inside of A.T.O.C is specifically focused on mission planning. We have control of the system prompt, and so we are able to say, not be an assistant, we want you to be an expert level mission planner and team organizer. And so it answers questions and it thinks about things like that. So when you ask it a question about, hey, I've got 6 guys in Nicaragua with power outages and I need the nearest port in Caracas, it can very quickly say, here you go. This is the airline you need to take from here to there. And so, it's not about replacing the planner. It's about the planner has other tasks that AI can't do. So let's let that guy do those tasks, and let's let the AI fit in where it needs to kind of solve some of those granular tasks. And so that's an example of a feature that is within A.T.O.C that is a premium feature that your average free user doesn't need. He's not working like that. But there are some people who have a lot of teams, they have a lot of stuff going on. They may benefit from the AI mission planning feature. And one thing I want to say about it too is it's not agentic. So agentic means that it has access to all of the data within your account. The mission planning AI that is on A.T.O.C is just a dumb chatbot. So it only knows what you tell it, and it's only responding to the information that you give it for that chat session, and then it disappears into wherever it disappears into. But it's not necessarily sitting there in your database looking through everything that you've put in. So just kind of a distinction for people who may or may not know about agentic AI versus LLM chatbots. They function very differently, where agentic knows more about you than just a chatbot does.
So what are, let me say, I don't want to make you have to rank them, but for people who want to be prepared, what are the top 3 events that you could foresee? Like if you were talking to your family, all right, you need to be ready for these 3 events. What are they? And aside from A.T.O.C, what would you tell them to do to be prepared for them?
Well, I'm going to do 4 because I have to get the first one out of the way, and I don't want it to count to my answers. So
okay.
I'll give you 4. The first one is the PSYOP, right? The mentality thing. People are always trying to make you fearful of something. They're always trying to turn you against something else, whatever the current thing is. The PSYOP is constant,
it's happening
right
now. It's happening now. Yeah.
It's happening right now. It's happening everywhere, and it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, left, right, or center, or what you do or don't care about, whether it's the Super Bowl or whether it's ICE or whether it's Epstein files. miles. The psyop is constant. So making sure that you're unplugged from the news cycle, unplugged and aware of the psyop, and understand this one thing. They are counting on you to respond based on your amygdala. That's the only thing that they can quantify. That is what they learned out of MK Ultra and all of these studies that they've done, is they understand really well how the human body and the human mind respond. And it responds instinctually from stimulus that hits your amygdala and controls your fear responses. And so if you're having a fear response, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you don't do exactly whatever the immediate thing that comes to your mind is, because that's actually what's being manipulated. Now, if you're going to fall off the edge of a cliff, your amygdala is there for a reason. It's telling you, hey man, back away from the edge a little bit, right? So I'm not saying ignore your intuition or ignore the faculties of your body, but I'm saying if your immediate response to something is amygdala based, is fear based, that should be a reason right there to rewind a little bit and analyze the situation a second further. So that's the first thing that I'll throw out there, and that's the one that I wanted to get out of the way. Now the three things that I would say beyond that are: one, water shortages and water crises. Know where to get water, have water on hand, know how to purify water, know where your water sources are, analyze how long water will last, all of those kinds of things, because the water system inside of cities, municipalities, these kinds of things are definitely prime for cyber attacks and any kind of attack, really, right? If you're attacking somebody's water, it's a good way to go. So water is definitely something I would have on hand, make sure it's clean. And, even if it's not malicious cyber attack stuff or whatever, just in general, a water contamination can very, very quickly lead to a massive situation. And in a lot of places in America, we saw this in Flint, Michigan. This isn't Jake's brilliant idea here. We've seen it play out in the United States. Lots of clay pipes in lots of underfunded cities that are, on the brink of infrastructure collapse anyways, so it's you don't see what the water infrastructure lies beneath your city. But if you did, you'd probably be shocked, and you'd be at every city council meeting making sure that they got the budget they needed to improve those systems, because most places in America got really old systems, And so, yeah, water. Because if you don't have water, you cannot do anything else. You can eat for not a lot of days. You can walk really, really far, but you can't do any of that without water. So yeah, planning for water contingencies, knowing where water sources are, those kinds of things, that would be the number one thing that I would take care of. The second thing is just general civil unrest. We see it all the time. We see it every day. People are at their wits' end. They're not making enough money at their job. They're irritated here, there, and everywhere, and so carrying a tourniquet on you, carrying some kind of self-defense on you, whether that's pepper spray or whatever. I don't want to encourage anyone to go out and get a gun, because a gun is not always called for, and a gun is not always the most useful thing to have. Pepper spray can create a lot of distance between you and an attacker, and you're much less liable to have to sit around and fill out a police report after you use it, so just having a tourniquet on you, having a way to create distance between you and somebody who's unstable. There's more and more unstable people out there every day, and I really think that's I don't think it's under planned for, but I think it's not appreciated how likely the scenario is these days, but it is very likely. And so, yeah, so that's the second thing. The last thing that I would say is a medical event, whether that's hospitals being overrun or whether that's supplies running out, coming short. There's companies out there like Jace Medical where you can pre-order, all of your pharmaceutical needs or antibiotics, things like that. We get a lot of our drugs and resources not inside the United States. We get them from other countries. And so therefore it's not entirely in our control when we do and don't have access, and what they will or won't cost. So, having a lot of good medical supplies on hand for things like antibiotics, and just in general kind of preparing for hospitals to be overrun, and if you're sick, you don't want to go to the hospital either. You can get more sick by having gone there, So if there's a real outbreak or something going on, some kind of chemical event or whatever, that's not where you want to be. So doing what you can do to have enough medical supplies at home. And those are going to be my three for real main answers. And not that the first one's any less, but those are my three that you asked me for.
Those are great. So now let me get to the next point with, let me say, order of priority. If someone has $500 to put toward being prepared, preparing their family, preparing their household, whatever, uh, if they only had that $500, because right, like you said, money's tight for a lot of people. A lot of
Yes, it
families are
is.
a lot of families are struggling. Earlier, when you were talking about the state of the country, I was going to mention taxes, but well, that would be another 5-hour conversation about the current taxes in our country. But
Yes.
someone has $500. They have $500. Uh, they don't know what to get first. They want to try to be prepared. What would you tell that dad, that husband, that father with a couple little kids? Hey, I could probably put $500 toward this. What should I get with this $500 to be more prepared than zero?
Yeah. Yeah, well, number one is going to be some kind of water purification system. I would hope that it's going to be something like a bag. There's larger bags that they make that you can roll down that
Mm-hmm.
carry, a lot more water than, say, something like a life straw. So just think about that. When you're getting a water filter, something like a life straw requires you to be at the water source, which you may not always be at.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
getting a water filtration system that allows you to store a lot of water and purify a lot of water at once can be really beneficial. And there's very affordable bags out there now that can do this kind of thing where you can fill up the water out of a stream and compress it down and filter it through. And that way you and your whole family can have plenty of water without having to constantly go back to the source. Or if you're moving from point A to point B and there is no source, you can kind of sustain you for that trip there. So that's one of the things that I would encourage people to do. The other thing is a free A.T.O.C account is going to get you organized and get you planned, right? That doesn't cost any money, so you can start doing that today, right? And that's going to help you and your team get organized and planned. You can go in there and build a pace plan. You can print off authentication tables so that you can validate who's on the other side of the radio and whether or not they can receive the transmission. If you don't know what an auth table is, Google it, look it up, or go check me out on some of my other stuff on Instagram. I've talked about auth tables before, but it's a way of verifying who's on the other line when you don't have encryption. If you're using something like a pair of walkie-talkies, which leads me into my next point, a small pair of communication device that gets you 1 to 3 miles of range, even if it's just some bubble pack walkie-talkies, a good way for you to communicate and organize with people outside of just your cell phone, diversify that just a little bit. So now the $500 mark is so great because you can actually do a ton with $500. I would say next after that, go and get a pickaxe where one end is really sharp and the other end is flat. You can get in pretty much any building with that tool. It allows you to separate the door frame from the edge of the locking mechanism enough where you can pry that door open. A Williams key is another one. A Williams key is a really neat tool that you can use to get down into like doors that have the push bar, like at movie theaters. You can use a Williams key to get behind that and to open that door. So I would just say in general, entry tools, right? Lots of places are going to be locked. Lots of places are going to have resources that are locked just for the sake of the fact that they're locked, not because somebody's keeping you out of it or whatever, but
Yeah.
just because it is a normally locked place. Or maybe there's a pool that has a fence around it. You could use a Williams key to get in there and filter water. Just entry tools in general is something that I would encourage people to focus on. Like I said, little pickaxe, little Williams key, water purification system. And then there's so much money left in that budget. I don't really know that I have time to go on this $500 shopping spree with you, but I would say in general, think less about the dollar amount that you have to spend to get prepared and think more about what the tool will provide you with value. Long before I had any money and long before money was even important, our ancestors, going back to this thing, were resourceful and they could look and see the landscape of what tools they might need, and if they didn't have them, they built them. That's how we got all these tools in the first place, is because other people built these tools. They didn't just arrive with them. They found out they needed them and they made them. So yeah, less about the money and more about just going out and figuring out what tools you can get within your budget. If you have 500, you're doing well. If you have 500, you're doing better than most people. So don't buy into the hype that because you can't afford the hot thing right now that you're somehow less prepared. Preparedness is right here. Go down and get a pickaxe. Go down and get some water purification stuff. Buy some taps. Buy some medical stuff. Get some kids' books. Go down to the dollar bookstore and buy some kids' books. You don't think about that kind of stuff. When it's all falling apart and you've got kids that are going crazy, mamas need to sit down with some fresh books and read them to those kids and
Yeah.
take care of them so that you can focus on the task at hand. You're not worried about mama and these stressed kids. So go down there and get some kids' books for $1 each. And put all this in a nice bag. I would say if you're going to spend the money anywhere, go down to an Army Navy surplus store and get a really good bag you can hook all this stuff in, and buy you a really nice pair of shoes. Buy you a really nice pair of Loa waterproof boots with some, wool socks, a solid bag full of stuff you know how to use that's going to allow you to protect and provide for the people around you in a meaningful way. But more importantly, iron that up, get it shored up, and make sure that you're not falling into these traps.
I love it. I love it. So the next question I want to ask is from the standpoint of protection. I mean, you talked about let me say a little bit of a weapon. What's your stance? Because there's people I talk to that are anti-gun. They say, I don't want a gun in the house. I don't want whatever. But then there's other people who say, yeah, either I own a gun. Yes, I have a gun and I have ammunition, or I'm open to owning a gun. When it comes to protection, movement, things like that, what would you recommend as someone with your background and your expertise? What kind of weapon do you think someone who's trying to be prepared and, okay, they have the water filtration, they have A.T.O.C, they got some data in there, but when it comes to something like a weapon, what would you recommend?
It totally depends on how much time and how much they're willing to commit to training with it. Of course I would sit here and recommend a firearm, right? It's common sense. You can do a lot with it. A lever action 22 from Henry Repeating Arms is a crazy weapon that will get you lots of small game and take care of the house. So I could sit here and say that all day, but if somebody's not going to go and train with it, right, because it's cost prohibitive or because they don't have time, well, then the gun does nothing. For that guy, the pepper spray is way more effective because he doesn't have to train with it. Point, squeeze, guy goes by, see you later. It's very, very simple and effective. For me, what I think about when I think about recommending stuff, as I do all the time because I'm training people all the time, I'm recommending something that falls within that person's skill set and falls within a lot of people have kids, full-time jobs, working 2 jobs. It's too much going on for them to also tack on like going to a CQB course or running a build drill all the time. Now, with that being said, you can dry fire for free. Do that. Train with that. It doesn't cost anything, doesn't really take any time to dry fire. Do it when you put it on before you leave, do it when you take it off at the end of the day, and you'll be 10x whatever anybody else is doing who's not dry firing. And the reason why, a lot of people say this, but I want to talk about why specifically dry firing. One thing that dry firing does is it allows you to get used to the process of presenting your weapon and squeezing the trigger without a massive explosion going off in front of your face. And the reason that that's important is because when you build that skill set up and your brain gets used to pulling the trigger without an explosion happening 4 feet in front of your face, your hand doesn't go like this. Because what I often see is people know that there's an explosion that's about to go off at the end of their face, and their body instinctively goes, ah! And they point it down and they point it away from themselves. It does not matter where you have your sight alignment at if at the very end of that trigger squeeze you go like this. Right? And so a lot of people, when they first start shooting, what I see a lot is that it ends up low or it ends up not even on the map because that explosion's happening, and rightfully so. Their brain is saying, dude, there's an explosion happening in your hands. You need to react to that. And so and they shoot down all the time. Dry firing specifically gets rid of that and helps get rid of that because you're used to pulling that trigger. You have muscle memory of having good firm grip, presenting, getting out, getting on plane, pulling the trigger, and that explosion's not happening, and you get rid of that dip that I see a lot of times. But this is not a firearms course. This is just a common sense approach to firearms and why dry firing is important. But something like a slingshot with some double aught BBs is a really effective tool for getting small game or taking care of lights that are pesky that you don't want or creating a distraction. for me, I think pepper spray is going to be the default answer, some kind of bear mace or something like that, because it's easy to conceal. It's something that you can use at a moment's notice and get out of dodge from. It's also not something that's going to make you stand out as a threat to your peers or to people who may be prying into your life. Now, I want to say this also under the scope that the Second Amendment is so, so, so important, and you should be practicing that, right? But as far as keeping people and protecting them and keeping them safe, what I would recommend for most folks is absolutely going to be some kind of pepper spray or something like that, because you just can use it and deploy it effectively. Work your way and step up into firearms ownership, firearms training. The Second Amendment is important, but so is your safety. So don't don't put your head in front of your feet too far and have an accident happen because you don't have a safe in your house or because you don't have enough time to build training and proficiency. The sad truth is, Suresh, is that a lot of people didn't grow up with folks who trained them how to be around firearms, and our nation is at a severe disadvantage as a result. Okay, but be that as it may, we shouldn't put people's safety second to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment, in some cases, the Second Amendment is very important, but I'd hate for somebody to, goof up. And then, that's why the Second Amendment is at risk, is because people who are not responsible with gun ownership get a hold of them, and so I just want to see people who are responsible with gun ownership get a hold of them, and
Yeah.
the 2A community will take that and say that I am, some kind of common sense, 2A restrictive guy. The reality is that I wish every American owned a 50 BMG. That's my stance. I think full autos should be totally legal and everybody should have a belt fed, and I like saying those things, but gosh, I'd hate to see somebody's kid get hurt or something like that because their father didn't teach them how to be responsible with firearms. I'd also hate for that guy to just be sitting at his house with no protection whatsoever, so I for those reasons I default into a bear mace category.
Yeah. No, I don't think it's a bad idea, but I like to have multiple weapons, pistols, rifles, long range rifle. But yeah, you're right. There, shotgun. There, I have it all, but I know that most people, and I talk to a lot of guys that will come over, and they'll say, "Man, you have, what is that, a sniper rifle?" I say, "Yes, it is. Yeah, that is a sniper rifle." What's that? Oh, okay, it's that's a smaller rifle for CQB. Oh, okay, this is a pistol. Okay, what's this? This is a shotgun. And there's, okay, well, if I want to get one to protect my family, which of these should I get? And I'm like, well, I
A
don't
Flux
know.
Raider.
Yeah.
If those are the constraints, then I'm saying a Flux Raider.
There you go. There you
Okay.
go, right?
Yeah, if those are the constraints, and I've got to give an answer, hand to God, what I'm saying is a Flux Raider. I've never had more fun or been more accurate or more deadly with any other gun in my life. It's so compact, it's so small, you throw it in a bag, you can keep it somewhere safe. It's not like trying to store a big rifle or shotgun somewhere. It's pretty inconspicuous. And gosh, you can be accurate all day long at 50 to 100 yards, even as a new shooter. So, yeah. Easy
Yeah.
to mount lights and optics too. It's relatively affordable for the amount of capability that it offers, and it stands apart from the normal PDW, world of small compact guns in such a major way. So, hand to God, that's my answer, Suresh. You made me answer it.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer.
Flux
Uh,
Raider all day. Or
so,
suppressed 22, suppressed Mark IV, suppressed
oh,
Ruger Mark IV 22. But that
22.
one's been in the gun tube space enough. I don't even think I need to say that one, but yeah, suppressed 22,
I love that sound.
Ruger Mark IV.
It just sounds like a little puff of air. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah, and the Ruger, you can hold your thumb on the back of the bolt so it doesn't even cycle. So it's nice.
I love it. I'm
Yeah.
just being introduced to the airgun world, which is a whole new world of weapons that I wasn't into. I didn't know about. But I just met with the owner of Utah Airguns at SHOT Show in Vegas when I was just out there. Man, I mean, what a whole world of fun airguns are. I mean, it's great. And 221B Tactical is also going to be bringing on a company called Byrna, which I don't know if you know the Byrna weapons. It shoots those little balls that are full of, I guess, pepper spray chemical. So the ball hits the person, it explodes and kind of
This is the best of
blinds
both worlds.
Yeah.
You're finding the best. See, you know about stuff I don't even know about yet, and that's the brilliance behind what you do. But I don't even know about that. But a pepper spray air gun is the perfect intersection of affordable capability.
Yeah, and that gun also shoots like a less lethal round,
Yeah.
but it also, so you could actually load multiple various ammo in the magazine. So you could have a couple of less lethal,
Right.
rubber, whatever, and then shoot a pepper ball that
What are
hits
they
you and
called?
explode. It's called
Burma?
Burna, Byrna, Burna.
Burna.
Yeah,
I'm
man.
going to order that as soon as we get off.
Oh man, I shot, and so legal in all states, legal to
That's
carry.
cool.
And man, I got to tell you, when it comes to less lethal, it's really really awesome. And the guys at Burna let me do a demo, and I said, once I did the demo, I said, okay, we need these in the 221B tactical store.
Were you on the receiving side of the demo or the
No,
delivering?
no, no. I was on the delivery side. I would not
Okay.
want to be on the
On the
receiving
receiving.
side because I'm sure. Well, I've been sprayed with pepper spray in the
Well,
academy, and
look,
I also.
that's our big YouTube video. Me and you will link up. I'll be on the receiving side of a Burna, and we'll take turns going
Oh,
back and
that'd
forth.
be
We'll
fun.
see which
That'd be
one.
fun.
See which
Yeah.
one can take the most, right?
I just put a sweatshirt on. I'll just put a sweatshirt on and be like, all right, this will dampen the blow. But that
Yeah,
pepper, oh man, I'm sure
that's the part.
yeah, it's spicy. Yeah, I remember in the academy, and then the senior guys rolled their patrol car over the hose that had the water coming out, so I couldn't even wash my face off because they stopped the tire right on the hose and cut the water flow off. Yeah, that's all right. That's pretty cool. Okay, so I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to end on this. So when you look at, in general, things that could happen, people are, what people are worried about. I talk to a lot of people. They're afraid of, okay, the next COVID. They're afraid of the next, whatever event that they feel maybe the government's going to be behind or whatever it might be. I talk to a lot of people, and for some reason, they feel like it's going to be something tied to technology. They feel like it's going to be something where our communication is cut off, our power is cut off, our water is cut off, or something like that. If you were a betting man, and I don't know, maybe you are a betting man, what would you get besides the psyop that's currently happening, like we talked about? What would you think people should be most prepared for? Should it be something to our water treatment? Should it be to the power grid? If you had to guess.
Okay, let me download this for a second. To have to relocate from where all their things are.
That's going to be the biggest concern.
Yes. That's
Yeah.
going to be the biggest concern. Is the fact that where you're at and where you're comfortable, you're not going to be able to be there anymore. You're going to have to go somewhere else. And so are you prepared to move from there? And I really like the idea of sheltering in, and I think for most reasons, most places, and most things, you can shelter in. But here's what I know about sheltering in. Even if you don't have it all, you have it all, right? You live there.
Yeah.
And so I think the thing that people need to prepare for the most is to be able to separate from that, because that will be very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for all the reasons, whether it's water or whether it's communication, you don't even think about how important a couple of bubble pack radios are whenever your wife's watching the kids and you got to go down to this creek to get water and you want to know if she's okay or not, or if there's a problem. It's not all about having some HF radio so you can make some once in a lifetime contact off the moon. It's not that. People want to make it that. But yeah, it's not that. It's just about knowing that your wife and kids are okay, so you can go get some water and take care of your family. That's the reality of what's going to be popping off. And so, yeah, that's my answer, Suresh. I know it's not the clip that most people need or want or whatever, but man, it's the answer. You need the ability to be able to depart from your home and to carry things on your back and to move your family safely and efficiently and to take the things that you need to be able to do that.
Yeah, man, I love that answer. It's so true. So true.
Well, we're nomadic creatures. There's
Yeah.
this beautiful quote that what is civilization but a clearing in the forest? And I love that quote because it's like if everything stopped today, within 6 months vines would be growing on buildings, Water pipes would be broken. There'd be rivers coming out of schools or whatever. It's like, what is civilization but just a clearing in the forest? And so, eventually the nature will retake itself and nature will survive. In fact, it's the only thing that's survived for the thousands or millions of years is nature. And what we know about nature and what we know about ourselves and human nature and the history of life is that for most times, people have been nomadic. This is one of the very few pieces of time where we've been sedentary. But throughout the scope of history, humanity, animals, and all of that have been nomadic. And so this isn't even about some kind of this again, most of what I think and say is not Jake's idea. It's just me looking at the way that things have gone and do go, and the fact is that one of the most inescapable aspects of our humanity, regardless of how advanced we think we are or whatever the case may be, we may be still advanced, but we may have to move and become nomadic and advanced. I don't know what it looks like. But yeah, the ability to retain the ability to be nomadic and to not lose that skill set and to not give up that right, I think that's really critically important. The same way as flexibility is, don't lose the ability to touch your toes. These are basic human functions that we need. Don't lose the ability to pick up your own body weight and to do a push-up. Don't lose these abilities, these very basic things that we should be able to do. I think be ready to pick up and go. Know what you need to grab. Know who you're going to need to grab. Know where you're headed. And, find yourself a way to reconcile with that.
Man, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's a great close to this conversation. And I want to make sure people know if they want to learn more about A.T.O.C or actually, go ahead and get it. Where can they go? Where can they find it?
Yeah, well, Suresh, thank you so much for having me on. First of all, I really, really appreciate it. It's always been a pleasure chatting with you. I've been knowing you now going on 2 or 3 years. We've had all kinds of conversations about all kinds of stuff, but this is the first time being on your show, and it's been a true pleasure. And, you were a friend first and a podcast cohort second. And so I really appreciate your time and appreciate getting to be on your show. But to answer your question, people can go and download the A.T.O.C app on the iOS store, which is a companion for the web app. And so they can go to that at atoc.io. That's Alpha Tango Oscar Charlie India Oscar, atoc.io. All the information is there that you need. It's all in bright orange stuff. It's a really frictionless process, and I've worked really hard to make sure that you have everything that you need to know what you need to know about A.T.O.C. There's videos there. All the resources are there for you to go and learn more. So just please go visit atoc.io. Now, if you're interested in some of the other products and stuff that we do, you can go to gridbase.net. That's GRIDBASE.net. So you can go check us out there, and that's actually our handle on Instagram or on Patreon if you want to support us, or on YouTube. It's gridbase.net, except instead of the dot, it's spelled out DOTNET. And so you can go find us on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and all those kinds of places, and we're always engaging with folks. Now, if you do go to A.T.O.C, there is a frictionless demo that you can just click and start messing around on, so you don't even have to give us your email or credit card or anything like that to sign up. You can just go ahead and go start checking out A.T.O.C all on your own. It's definitely best on desktop, but you can do it on your phone too, or a tablet is actually really good. But it's meant for sitting at a desktop or a tablet and operating with it that way. But that's where you can go and learn more about us. The people that get first access to all of our tools are our beta testers over on Patreon. So you can go to patreon.com/gridbase. We built 5 different apps last year. One of the apps that we built was for finding camera infrastructure around you. So you can actually see where flock cameras are. You can see where DOT traffic cams are, and it's all on a radar on your phone. So while you're out moving around the world, you can see what the status is of the surveillance state that you're currently in. So it's a really neat tool. It's called Vantage. That's over on the App Store. We built a sex predator list that goes across all 50 states with hundreds of thousands of sex offenders. You can see them on a radar. You can see them on a map. Again, when you're out with your family, with your kids, you can quickly pull out your app and see what the heat map looks like around you for whether or not you're surrounded by a bunch of predators or not. So anyways, we have all kinds of really cool stuff that we're doing all the time. You can go and check us out on the iOS app. Like I said, just go look at Vantage, and then you can see other apps by this person. Safe Radius is the sex offender app, and it was in the top 100 for some amount of time in the utility apps on the App Store. I'm very proud of that. We have a book on Amazon, the Baofeng Buyer's Guide. So if you're interested in reading, you want to learn more about ham radio stuff and decentralized communication, go to Amazon.com and just look up the Baofeng Buyer's Guide. You can find that book there. I didn't use one piece of AI to write it. It's manually edited by a guy and written by a guy. Maybe one of the last books to ever have that mark. But that's over there on Amazon. So that's where people can find us, Suresh.
Oh, amazing. I mean, and I'm glad you said that too, because I still handwrite all my blogs, and I just feel like it's the last frontier of authenticity in the world that we're in, where everything
writing specifically,
just like writing, I feel like writing is going to be that thing that people are going to gravitate toward, because people can sniff out AI. I could sniff out AI. You know, we could sniff out the AI videos now. And, you know, when you see content, written content, you can kind of just feel like, and it doesn't feel natural, it doesn't feel authentic. And I feel like I would be losing my tone. And I'm not going to lie, we tried to shift toward some AI in some of our content and some of our copy. And I just, you know, as the owner of the company, I didn't like it. And I know it's a little bit more labor intensive, not that much, but it's also a good outlet for me to put my thoughts out there, and it's almost like therapy for me. So I you know, all the blogs I still write by hand, and you know, the editor edits it, of course. But I think that and you know, the what I feel like I'm going to be doing more of in 2026 is live streaming, because that you can't AI that. And I think people are going to want to reconnect. Yet. Yeah. So let me not say yet.
Give it 90 days.
Yeah, right. That's about the time frame. The speed things are moving in. Yeah. And it's real. You know, it's just a little bit more real, where I can talk. People can ask me questions, and it just feels more authentic. I feel like people are gonna, you know, everything goes full circle, right? And I feel like that's what people are gonna come back around to: real writing, real people talking, not AI. And
well, look, on that note, this is not a plug, but I am a vinyl only DJ. So I DJ complete music sets with a collection of over 500 vinyls. So in case you were questioning whether or not I'm really about this decentralized life, wonder no more, because I will not be in a post-futuristic world without music. And so people can go to vinyldj.fm and check that out. And it's just like you're saying, it's not synthesized, no computer or whatever. It's just real music that's right there, that's actually analog etched into a piece of vinyl, and we're playing it. But I'm such a nerd for that, and so I love to hear that you're still writing your articles and doing all of that. And I think you're absolutely right that there is a resurgence of people who want real, tangible things, and that's why vinyldj.fm exists, is so that people can experience music in its rawest form. And of course, that's why platforms like yours exist, and products and companies like yours exist, so that, you know, it's a real human making real stuff, making real decisions about how to empower real people, you know. And anyways, I think that's why you and I have always gotten along really well, Suresh. But thank you so much for having me on here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to make sure that I'll add in all the links for people to find you everywhere. And I appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Take care.